So I'm going to kick us off, and I think we can start recording now that we are officially starting the session. I am Viktorya Vilk. I'm the Director for Digital Safety and Free Expression at PIN America. I'm going to do a very quick intro, like 2 minutes. Please, now that we've sorted out the chat, let us know in the chat where you are coming from in the world and what brings you here today. It would be very, obviously, we're the only people who are going to be able to see it are the two panelists and the hosts, but it will give us a sense of how we can be most helpful to you. And we'll kind of do a quick little readout to see kind of who's coming from where. We've got Brooklyn, Louisiana. Oh, amazing. We've got someone from, well, maybe I won't say that aloud. We have people from international parts, from other countries outside of the United States. Iowa, Silver Springs, Maryland. So thank you for joining our Protecting from Hacking and Doxing session. It's the third in our 6-part U.S. Election Safety Summer series. We are very proud to be able to offer this critical training to journalists in the lead up to the elections in collaboration with the Committee to Protect Journalists and the International Women's Media Foundation, as well as our supporting partners. You can see we have a lot of them. We wouldn't have been able to do this without them. We've got ACOS, Report for America, ONA, Reporters Committee for a Free Press, Writers Guild of America East, the Indigenous Journalists Association, Society of Professional Journalists, Freedom of the Press Foundation, and American Press Institute. Thank you so much to all of those folks for helping us. These webinars are taking place on select Tuesdays at noon, and we are approaching safety in these webinars holistically. So we're recognizing how physical, digital, legal, and psychological safety are all intertwined. Those of you who've come to these before have heard us talk about how 2024 is a super election year. There are over 60 national elections happening around the world, which is almost half of the world's population. And we know, unfortunately, that journalists face increased risk during election cycles. In the US, our elections are taking place in November, and we are already seeing increased attacks against reporters. Our partners, the International Women's Media Foundation, have been leading this really amazing Newsroom Safety Across America tour of in-person trainings in swing states. And as part of that initiative, they did a survey of more than 350 journalists, and they found that nearly 40% of the folks surveyed reported threats of or experiences of physical violence. 30% reported digital threats and attacks, and 27% experienced legal threats. And we're like, it's not even anywhere near November yet, you know? So that's kind of the state of affairs. That's why we felt it was so important to do this series. This series is focused on reporters in the US. However, we very much hope that the safety tips that we're offering are going to be useful to you regardless of your geographic location. And so finally, just as a final reminder, the chat is only visible to the panelists and the hosts, but we will periodically be checking if we can pop in stuff from the chat to everyone so that everyone can see. If you have questions, please feel free to ask questions throughout the session. We'll do our best to answer them. Put them in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, that's okay, but they might get buried a little bit. So it's much easier if they're in the Q&A because we can actually respond to them both in real time in the Q&A and on screen. So I am here today with one of my favorite people in the whole world. Harlo, can you jump in and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Harlo Holmes, and I'm the Director of Digital Security at Freedom of the Press Foundation.
Thank you, Harlo. So this is the series. This is session 3, as I mentioned. Please be sure to check out the next 3 on legal rights. And again, the legal rights section will very much be focused on a US context. Journalist safety covering the election in terms of protest policing and crowds, and protecting your mental health in the face of online and offline attacks. We hope that you will join those as well. And finally, just a few simple community agreements. We'd like folks to recognize, experiences that they hear about, whether we're kind of summarizing them from what we see in the chat, or kind of talking about our own experiences, but that there is a sense that what is discussed here stays here in terms of people's personal experiences. But if you've learned something and you find it really useful in terms of a technique, a tactic, a tool, etc., please feel free to share that out. Talking about online abuse and also doing things to quote unquote dox yourself can be quite stressful. So if at any point you just need to step away from your computer, like turn off the screen or whatever, you do whatever you need to take care of yourself. And I think that should be it. And also, we've got a bunch of folks asking in the chat if recordings of the previous sessions are available. They are. My colleagues will share that out to everyone, not just to the hosts and panelists. We'll share the recordings from the last two sessions, and this one will eventually also be available online. Okay. So the purpose of today's session is to empower you with strategies and resources to protect yourself from hacking, doxing, impersonation, and other abusive tactics, which I'll define in a minute. We have a very dense session for you. So, and you will be emphatically on your computers and phones the entire time, not just because you're multitasking, but because we're going to have you doing things in real time on your devices. So if you don't have your phone out, you might want to go grab it. And presumably you already have your computer out because that's how you're here. We're going to talk about the tactics. We're going to talk about, quote unquote, how to dox yourself. We'll explain what we mean by that. We're going to give you a little bit of digital security 101, but we're not actually going to spend a lot of time on digital security 101 because we've covered that in previous sessions. Probably you've heard it in other sessions. We're just going to talk a little bit about it. We're mostly going to talk about auditing your social media accounts in real time today. Now, we're going to hopefully be able to get through at least 3 or 4 of the ones we have on the screen: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Venmo. We'll probably ask you in real time which ones you most want to cover because we're probably not going to have time for all of them. And then we can always send you a checklist for all of the platforms that you can do on your own time later, as well as other resources that are discussed through this session. Okay. I always say this, if you come to any of my sessions, you'll hear me say this over and over again. If we're going to try to figure out how to tackle online abuse, we have to have a shared definition of what it is, right? We at Penn America define it as the repeated or severe targeting of an individual or group in an online setting through harmful behavior, right? The point there is just one incident of online abuse. If somebody publishes your home address all over the internet, can be incredibly severe, but sometimes it's also not about what the individual piece of abusive content is or what the tactic was so much as that it's pervasive, right? So it's the volume, it's the frequency, both of those, whether it's one severe incident or a lot of frequency and volume or a mix of the two, can be really destructive. So we're going to talk about 4 specific tactics. Today, we're going to focus on 4 specific tactics, and we're going to give you tools to arm yourselves against those tactics. So hacking is when basically somebody actually gets into your device or your network, right? They're not just making a copy of it. They're actually in there and they're able to potentially lock you out of it and do all kinds of things from within that account without your consent or blessing, obviously. Impersonation, people often confuse with hacking, but it's different. Impersonation is when somebody essentially makes a copy of your account or makes an account that looks just like you. They use your photo, they use your name, they use your biographical data, but it's not you. And the way that you deal with those is quite different. So that's why I feel it's important to distinguish them. Message bombing is when somebody floods your email inbox or cell phone or any number of other softwares or devices, whatever that you need to use, with so much garbage that you can't actually use it properly. And doxing is the one that I think most people are kind of particularly concerned about, which is when somebody publishes private sensitive information like your home address, your cell phone, where your kids go to school online in an effort to intimidate you. So we are going to give you tools and strategies to cope with a whole range of these different tactics, particularly to cope with them sort of proactively, because the more that you can do in advance to reduce the amount of information that's visible about you online, the less likely folks are to be able to deploy these tactics against you. I am going to hand you over in a second to Harlo, who is going to teach you how to quote unquote dox yourself. And I just want to be clear, we're not literally going to teach you to expose your own personal information. That would be ridiculous. We're going to help you think like a doxer, to find what information is available about you online so that you can try to remove some of that information. But I will offer a trigger warning. This activity can be, it's incredibly useful, but it can be a little bit terrifying. So we're going to kind of try to guide you through it. And we'll check in on you regularly to make sure that you're doing okay. Because our goal is not for you to become little paranoid tinfoil hat wearing kitties. Our goal is for you to be fully prepared to protect yourselves on the internet and feel empowered while doing so. So Harlo, I'm going to do the slides for you. You just have to holler when you want me to switch them. And
Okay.
let's start simple.
Okay, and And also for trigger warning there, if Drake is triggering, and not only Drake, but also old memes of Drake, then consider yourself warned, and that's the last time you'll see it. But okay, getting to the meat here. So first and foremost, the first thing that someone might do is start out with a simple Google search, as you see here. So we have Victoria, who is using Google to find out some information about me. You'll notice that it's Victoria because Victoria is signed in, and that's signified by that V in the top right-hand corner. So in addition to all of the changes made at Google nowadays, you won't get so far in using Google in order to find out a lot of information about people that is particularly hidden. For instance, Victoria and I know each other very well. And so there might be associations about our relationship that gets surfaced. Victoria is logged in, so it's reflective not only of the account that Victoria is presenting to Google, but also other things like, where she is logged in, what device she's using, what AI thinks that is most pertinent to Victoria as she Googles. So what we're going to try to do is do something that is a little bit more comprehensive. That gets you a little bit more information. And so on the next slide, actually, you'll see that we can actually introduce other search engines into the mix. Hold on one moment as we get our...
Harlo, just do it for 1 second without the slides. I'll have the slides back up in just a minute. A little bit of
Sure,
technical difficulties, but just tell people which sites to look up.
All right, so we will show you, but some great alternatives to Google as a search engine are things like DuckDuckGo or Brave Search, both of which I introduce here because these are examples of privacy-preserving search engines. And they don't require you to have like an explicit account in order to use those. So what that means is, Victoria, I think we have the wrong screen here. There you go. Thank you very much, Amanda, for popping in DuckDuckGo. Cool. And also, if you want to introduce Brave Search there, that would be great as well. In addition to not having your search queries tied to a Google account, which tends to accumulate a lot on you, they also have different ways of indexing the web that is slightly different from the way Google ingests all that information. So if there is AI that's enabled, you're going to see those results differently. And all of those other factors don't necessarily contribute. I use the term indexing. And what that is the way that these search engines crawl the internet and associate how important any particular bit of information that they find should show up in your search results. And because these tend to be trade secrets, meaning Google has its own way of indexing and granting importance to stuff on the internet, other companies are going to do the same. And also, for a variety of reasons, doing these same searches internationally might yield different results altogether. So especially because we have a group of folks that are coming in internationally, there are other search engines such as Yandex, which is from Russia and also prominent in that particular region. You might want to look at Baidu, which is China's search engine. These are all different examples of different ways that the internet is indexed across the globe. Now, I can't say that these results are going to be vastly different. And some of them might actually be like incorrect or not necessarily what you'd expect. But getting that different perspective on all those things will bring you a little bit further down into, the parts of the internet where the most prominent search results are usually shown to you. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty. And so while Victoria figures out what we're going to do with the screen share, I actually will head to the chat to see if I can find anything there. And so for those of you who joined us just a little bit late, you might not have heard the way that we want to handle the chat here. So we do want to maintain as much privacy in the questions that you ask as possible. So I'm not going to be, like calling out people's specific names. And someone might actually even ask you privately in the chat whether or not they'd like to to repeat your remarks with a little bit more information if you've shared it. But for things that don't contain any specific information, as long as they are on track and in step with our discussion, I don't have any problem talking about them here. So let's see. Anything in the chat?
Have I fixed it, folks? I think I finally fixed the screen share. Can someone confirm that they can see the slides again? My computer had a meltdown, but I think I have fixed it. Okay. All right, Harlo, back to where you were, our favorite slide.
All right. So what we said about the chat and its privacy still stands. Feel free to pop those questions in the chat, and we'll maintain your privacy as much as we possibly can in addressing them. Also, please do refrain from offering your own, security tips, because that's what we want to do here for you. And we want to make sure that we keep everything on track as we speak. But that said, all right, let's get back to this module right here. So we talked about other search engines, but now let's actually talk about other techniques that you can use in Google and in other search engines in order to be way more specific about the type of information that you want to bring up on the web. So we call this Google dorking, but once again, this works on a variety of search engines and even in some cases, social media platforms. And what you're doing is you're introducing what are called operands into your search query in order to make it more specific about the type of information you want. Now, some of you might have already experimented in doing this in AI-enabled search engines, but for those of you who haven't, and for those of you who want to use a search engine where that's not yet available, Google dorking is kind of what you have to do. So here's an example. First, we have like quotation marks, right? So you'll see on the first example, we have me looking up Rose, my friend Rose Duper, within quotation marks, and that binds the search to just the terms that I gave it. And also that would take into account misspellings and other variations of a name. And second, we have what's called a asterisk or a wild card. And so what that means is that within the bounds of those quotation marks, anything that we throw in the middle, such as a maiden name, a middle name, a nickname, things like that, might be shown within those search results. But once again, other than the wild card, things like misspellings and stuff like that, that is something you have to think about. This is a lot of information to take in, so I'll let you look at the slide before we move on. But I do want to, as you're looking at it, introduce some of my favorite ones, which is the cite and the minus cite operator. And so there's a couple of a couple of operators like this, such as in text, sites, URL, things like that, depending on your search engine. But what it does is it either focuses on or removes entirely the particular site that you put in question. And so for you as journalists, you might want to use this because as journalists, you have such great SEO, right? We know where your bylines are. So my friend Rose, who used to write for Slate, by removing Slate from the search results, we get everything a little bit further down in internet search results because we've removed her most prominent results. And also there's the file type. And so this works for things like PDF documents, Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, anything that is not a website, we'll say. So this is actually really interesting if you try it, because some of you might have had old term papers up or resumes that you uploaded to a portal that, depending on how old you are when you are in the job market, might have information like your home address, phone number, and other things like that. So it's always good to be aware of these things. And that might seem a little bit scary, might make you feel a little bit vulnerable, but we did want you to know that this can be really, really helpful for you in knowing where this information resides.
I'm just
Okay.
going to jump in since
Yeah.
we have now fixed all of our technical difficulties and basically just since poor Harlow was interrupted several times, just reinforce that if you just straight up Google yourselves, you're not going to find the kinds of information that a doxer or a hacker might try to find about you. So you want to get really creative. And in fact, this Google dorking slide, it's obviously useful in terms of stalking and doxing yourself, but it's actually also really useful in your investigative reporting. And I really recommend if you haven't done it yet in real time, try the thing where you put in Google like your email address, just like we have highlighted red here, your email address, file type PDF, and just or file type Excel and see what happens. Because I have discovered my email on like Google Sheets that people forgot that they had made public that had all of my private information, and they didn't do it on purpose. They just didn't look at the settings. And so try it, see what you find. There's all kinds of ways to try to get information removed that you don't want up. You can't always do it, but there are things you can do, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Sorry, back to you, Harlo.
Sure, sure. I mean, it's important information. And also we can talk about image searching. So this is pretty interesting technique. It's where you, like either, you can do it in a number of ways, but ultimately it's to see where your face shows up. And also you can find out like who that is in association with in order to get a better handle on that aspect of your identity. So there's a couple ways to do it. One, here's a very simple way with Google. You can just perhaps type in your name and then click on images. That reveals a number of images. Fine, that makes sense. But if you want to dig even further, you might actually want to do a reverse image search on the image that shows up in the search result. And actually, you can do that very simply by, just context clicking, right clicking, or whatever on a particular thumbnail, and then selecting search Google for this image. And so that will throw it back into the loop of reverse image searching. So that's the first way that you can do it. Here's some other ways that you can perform reverse image search in Google and a variety of others. You can simply take an image that you have on your desktop, let's say, and then just upload it or drag it and drop it into the search bar itself via the image search that exposes itself in the search bar there. And so one of the reasons why I think reverse image searching is powerful is the following. Search engines like Google, like Bing to a certain extent, and others, not only show you their the images, but they also give you a really easy way to track where those images reside on the internet. And in a lot of places, especially in the first results, that makes a lot of sense. It makes sense that my image might be associated with the website where my university did a profile on me, or at a conference where I was giving a talk. But if you find that image actually repurposed in places on the internet that you do not recognize readily and are a little bit intimidating, this is actually a great way to follow up on it. And another thing that we've only started to speak on is, how our image can be repurposed using AI, deep fakes, and other things like that. And so if you do find a preponderance of images of yourself showing up on in unrealistic visual scenarios in contexts that do not make sense, that actually can be very interesting information for you to know. And
yeah, and I just want to emphasize that, like, one of the ways this is most useful, for example, is that people will often take your Facebook profile photo or another social media profile photo that you have public and do weird stuff to it as a kind of way to harass you. And it's useful to know that that is happening, because sometimes you can do things to get that content removed. And we can talk more about it if we have time, but
yeah,
sometimes, depending on what country you're in, you can use copyright law. If it's your image, someone is essentially violating your copyright by using it. Sometimes you can report to a website that they are using something without your permission. So there's various things that you can do. And certainly you can reduce the visibility of your photos of yourself on your own social media channels so that they are harder to steal and manipulate. And I do just want to reinforce something that Gigi's also responding to in the chat. Gigi, I think you might want to hit respond to everyone so everyone can see it. But just to kind of explain, someone asked in the chat, you're giving us tools and strategies that are useful for the US, But actually, so far, everything we've shared you can do from any part of the world, right? Google is a search engine that's used in many places. If there is a search engine that's more frequently used in the part of the world that you're in, try these same techniques and strategies on that search engine. So far, what we've been sharing will be relevant. There will be a few things we share a bit later that are going to be less relevant if you're outside of the States, but we can flag when that's the case. Sorry, Harlan.
Sure. Just to follow up on that, when you use the tools that are exposed by your search engine in order to remove content, that pertains to the search engine itself, which means it's no longer indexed. It does not remove it from the internet at large, and in which case you're going to have to work within whatever system is exposed by where that media originally resides to get it taken down. This is a little bit beyond what we're talking about today, but please do follow up with that. There are a number of organizations, Freedom of the Press Foundation included, that do the same. I see some other questions about mobile security, but I am going to kind of bookmark that, and perhaps they are going to be covered in subsequent sessions about, reporting on the ground, going to events and things like that later on in the series of in July. So all of those questions about things like Celebrites and IMSI catchers and all that might be covered later on. But before we do, we should talk about where all of the data comes from. Now, this is primarily a US phenomenon. However, there are a number of companies that are trying to mimic what we do in the US so well and degrade your right to privacy. So think of the United States as your test subjects, and be vigilant about this. What I'm talking about here are data brokers. These are companies that whose job it is to find a lot of the data as it's scattered around the internet and aggregate it in a specific place for it to be searchable and findable. And we're going to show you a little bit more detail later, but there are a couple places that you can look first to predict where this data might come from. And talking about data breaches. So data breaches are events that happen when a website or service that you use has its information on you taken from the website by hackers on the internet. And what hackers are most likely to do is to take all of that data that they find and put it on the public internet where other people can make use of it. This includes data brokers, which we're about to talk about, but also, hackers who are just trying to see if they can use the information that's exposed against you. So in the previous slide, we showed you a really, really cool tool that you might see in the chat there called haveibeenpwned.com. This is the best, although not the only, but the one that we highly recommend, clearinghouse of all of the places where you have had your personal information taken from that website in a data breach. This is an example. If you were to pop in my personal email address, this is what you would get, right? This is public information. I can inquire about anyone whose email address I might be curious about, right? So there's no safeguarding here. It's all public information. This is information that other companies have held that they have let go due to their own malfeasance. And so it is not my fault. It's not your fault. It's no one's fault that the information within this data breach has gotten onto the internet. It is Adobe's fault for not holding onto it correctly. It is Bitly's fault for not holding onto it correctly. So never feel ashamed. Never feel that, it's something to that you could have done better if you find out that you are also part of a data breach. However, there is one thing that you must do, and we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail later, is to take note that, let's say Bitly has totally dumped my username and password. So they know that, harlo.holmes@gmail.com, right, is going to be associated with a Bitly account. And what an attacker might do is they're not going to care that they can log into Bitly. I don't care that I can log into Bitly. I don't. However, they might want to try to see if the same username and password can be used in combination to get into something more important to me and something that can be more ruinous, like such as my personal email account, my bank account, things like that. And so this is the best thing that you can do to protect yourself here, is to notice if such a breach has occurred and make sure that you are not reusing that affected password or any password at all on any other site or service that you use, and also kind of think about whether you want to use Bitly in the first place. All right, so data breaches are a trove of publicly available information that adversaries can use to find more information about you. And they usually reside in data broker websites where they have monetized all of this free and open information about people, put it in one place, and made it available to anyone who has an account that they've paid for. This is a billion-dollar industry, and currently in the United States, we are trying, but still there is no meaningful regulation to stop them from doing what they're doing. Right here, we're giving you 4 examples, but there's over 500 of these companies in the United States alone, and a lot of them attempt to operate in certain ways internationally. And quite frankly, it's as simple as using a search engine. So you can pop in anyone's name very easily. Thank you, Victoria, for scaring me by putting in my name, and see which results come up. And this could include your personal address, phone number, information about your family and people that you're associated with, and things like that. Now, it is really, really scary to know that all of this information is available, but I do want to give you a little bit more of a point of empowerment. One is that this information is not necessarily always available like in mass. It's only to people who have a paid account, and they do have to apply for this account. So it's not just like anyone can do that. And also, you have the ability to opt out. And that means having that information removed from every single data broker that you file this to. So that's the good news. And you can do this entirely for free if you manually go to every single data broker site that has your information and file to opt out. Now, given that there's up to 500 of these data brokers, that might feel really, really daunting. And also, data brokers have the tendency to wait a couple of months and then grab the information and publish it again. But if you do want to go that route and vigilantly, periodically do the scrubbing yourself, we highly recommend going to Yael Brower's big ass data broker opt-out list. And we have the link in the chat to that if you want to go directly to it.
I actually have to add one thing.
Yeah, go for it.
So Yael, God bless her, and Consumer Reports actually quite recently, and I forgot to add it, created this thing called permission slip that for free will help you do some of this automated, will help automate some of the opting out. We'll talk about more you can actually pay a company to do this for you, and that will work even better. And Harlo will talk about that in a minute. But for those of you who are like, there is no way that I'm going to go to 500 sites and try to get my information removed, but I also can't afford to pay someone to do this for me, please Google permission slip Consumer Reports, and you will find a free tool that is very good, that is thanks to this wonderful person on the screen, that will help you if you can't afford to pay a service. Sorry, Harlo, I wish I had remembered to put that slide in because the tool is quite new. But I just wanted to flag that in case anyone's like, I can't do this manually. It's public. Yeah, permission slip is now available to
All
folks,
right.
and we should add a slide about it because it's really great.
Yeah,
but yes, next slide.
Great news. Great. Okay,
I'll pop it in the chat as well.
We'll say that this is option 1B, is finding a middle ground, such as permission slip by Consumer Reports, which is great. And now your second option, all the way on the other end, is paying a service to do all of this work for you. And so Delete Me, Optory, and Canary are the 3 most prominent and most effective services that you have. So what your you can probably understand your trade-offs. You can do it entirely for free, and either expend a lot of your own time and resources and things like that to do it, and remind yourself that you have to do it every year or so, every, twice a year. Or you can pay someone roughly $130 a month, or sorry, a year, in order to provide the service for you. And that provides a lot of really, really excellent coverage. Now, some of you actually might even come from organizations where they provide that to you on a case-by-case basis, depending on your the risk that you're exposed to, or they can subsidize it. But in the meanwhile, until we have better legislation and a better grip on this horrible, horrible industry, these are the options that people at the highest threats use. Okay, that's a lot. One thing that these things do not cover are social media, and the amount of information that we might include in social media that also contribute to profiles that people might leverage. And so let's do a little bit of a check-in, and then we'll get to the social
And then I'll
media.
jump into social platforms. How are we doing? I think we had quite a few questions that my colleagues were trying to keep up with, but oh, why is this happening? See, Zoom settings lately have been changing. It's very annoying. Sorry. So I want to check on some of the questions that have come up.
Sure. Actually, let's talk about things that are public records, such as court records, and other things like that.
Harlo, can you take that one? Do you have
Sure,
a sense
sure.
of,
I mean, it's a great question.
well,
and
let's paraphrase the question, because people can't all see the questions in the chat.
Yep.
So can you paraphrase the question and then answer?
Sure. So the question is, are there ways to scrub things like court records, things like speeding tickets? And I'm also thinking of, this is not part of the question, but it also falls under the banner of stuff like housing deeds, right? Marriage certificates, things like that. A lot of things are public record. Some things can be like for certain court records, and off the top of my head, I cannot tell you which and which. And it also it depends, like internationally, there are different laws. Those things certain court records can be sealed, and so that can minimize the amount of information there. But there are a lot of things, such as like house ownership, that under normal circumstances, unless there is like, some sort of legal shield, depending on the state in the United States where you live and things like that, that will make things like house ownership and titles public. So that said, though, you can seek, redress in order to make sure that that information is removed, but it's on a case-by-case basis. A judgment can be sealed, but that's something that you have to deal with on a case-by-case basis. If you live in a state that has a shield law that says, because of the line of work that you do, you require your home address to not be mentioned in public records, that is something that you have to pursue. Another thing, actually, the thing that in the United States that people don't necessarily know about is unclaimed funds. By law, if you are, like, let's say, part of a class action lawsuit that you won, and I don't know, like the Juul e-cigarette company, like, has to pay you $2 or something as part of a class action lawsuit. If that money is sitting on the table, then it is up to the state comptroller to list a lot of the records as to who was owed, that measly amount of money. And it seems like not worth the price of the stamp in order to claim your money. But these are things that you could do in order to keep your publicly listed information out of prying eyes. So once again, it's a case-by-case basis. Other countries have better laws altogether, like a lot of, judgments and people's involvement in court cases by law do not include such public information. And so, like, if you're in Italy, let's say, you have a lot more privacy there. It's just baked into the fabric of your legal system. So this is something that you need to discuss on a case-by-case basis with someone who can guide you.
Probably a lawyer. I mean, I hate to say it, like, look, the truth is, it's in the United States, it's extremely difficult to get you can get your information removed from these data broker sites. You can actually, often you can get websites to remove your information depending on how malicious the website is, or if it was just a mistake or someone just being a little bit careless. It's very difficult to get your information removed from public records. Which as journalists, we would not want it to be super easy for people to remove their information from public records, but when it comes to our own safety, it's a huge problem. And so talking to a lawyer with some knowledge of the privacy, security, whatever, like the laws of your state, will probably be how to deal with that particular problem. And chances are there may not be a lot you can do when it comes to, for example, voter rolls. I'm going to keep us moving in the interest of time, but I would just like to ask my colleagues to look through the chat. And if I missed some questions, maybe we can address them in the chat directly. And if not, I'll come back to them. So I want us to do,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
think we're good.
Okay, so we are going to take back power and control, particularly around social media platforms and what kind of private data they're bleeding. Because data brokers, look, partly they feed off of data breaches and other things that you have no control over, but they also feed off of our social media platforms where we are not super tight about our settings. So we're going to take back power and control. There's a cute cat that is ready, just like you are. Take out your devices. Well, first of all, I want to ask you, if you have a piece of paper or a document next to you, make a list. Obviously, don't lose this piece of paper or throw it outside, this sensitive piece of paper. Make a list of your 10 most sensitive accounts. Not any further information, just what they're called, right? Like a checklist, basically, right? So I'm thinking your personal email, your professional email, banking, cloud storage, right? Google Drive, Apple Cloud, whatever. Social media accounts. If you have your own website, that goes on there too. So take 1 minute right now while we make sure we've answered all of your questions that we could possibly answer. Some of them unfortunately don't have good answers. Take a minute to write down your 10 most sensitive accounts. And we're going to talk about what to do with those accounts. Try to make it much more difficult for someone to hack into them and do you damage and harm. So I'm assuming people have mostly maybe made their lists. Maybe they're still in the process of making their lists. This is going to be the very brief Digital Security 101 section that I promised you we were not going to spend an enormous amount of time on. But I think people have a tendency to think that digital security requires an enormous amount of training, technical knowledge, and sophistication. And of course, at the professional level, if that's your job, it does. But for everyday folks who are using the internet, the things that you can do to make yourself safer than the vast majority of other people using the internet are actually pretty straightforward and not very complicated. They just require a little bit of time and a little bit of kind of attention and focus. So for your list of your 10 most sensitive accounts, at the very least for those accounts, please, please, please create long, complicated passwords, at least 16 characters. Harlo, why 16? Like, why not 10? Why not 8? Why 16? Can you explain?
Well, okay. The short answer to it is that computers are really, really good at just like kind of like hammering away at a variety of different combinations of letters and numbers, and also taking into account like other things like the most commonly reused passwords and things like that, that make it really, really easy for attackers under certain circumstances to guess what a password is. And the thing that most makes a password good is how complex it is to a computer and how much time it's going to spend making these like automatic computations. So give the computer a run for its money. Don't make it easier. Never go with like the default, like 8 digits or whatever. Like actually opt for something that gives a computer something to do if they want to get your password.
And we're going to show you, I'm going to come back to the second option in a minute, but we're going to show you, go to this website. It's called, you can Google how secure is my password, and please For the love of all that is holy, don't put your real password in.
Do not, just use it as an
Don't
example.
put your real password in. Just an example, right? Go to how
Try
secure is my
password
password.
123. Password one
Yeah.
two three is actually
1, 2, 3,
the
4.
most.
1, 2, 3, 4 is good. Is that the most common password that people use?
Yeah,
Harlo?
it is.
Oh, that makes me so sad. Okay, well, don't use password 1, 2, 3 in your own life, but test it out. What you'll notice, this is what Harlo is getting at. If you have a password that's just 4 or 5 characters, it will take a computer seconds to guess it. If you have a password that's 16 characters, especially if it's a bunch of random words, it will actually take a computer millions of years to guess. This is why people keep haranguing you about passwords. It's not because we have nothing better to do with our lives or our time. It's because it genuinely makes or breaks your account safety, is the length of your password. It's like leaving your front door unlocked all the time, right? Like, or having a lock that like is literally like one of those little things that you just turn that's from the outside, right? It's not gonna make you very safe. So this is a adorable comic that shows you what we're getting at. The password in the top left of the comic, Troubadour43, is what people think is a safe password. It is not. Just because it has a 0 instead of an O does not make it a safe password. The password in the bottom left, which is long and has 4 totally random words in it, great password. Very hard to hack. Try to put correct horse battery staple on how secure is my password, and it'll tell you how long it would take a computer to guess that. So that just gives you an example. So we said, practice password hygiene. For your 10 most secure accounts, your most sensitive accounts, which we want to make your most secure accounts, make sure you have different 16-character passwords for each one. And then pick difficult to answer security questions. We were just showing you, right? Data brokers. Most people can find your mother's maiden name pretty fast. Most people can find the color or name of your first car pretty fast. It's kind of silly that companies ask you questions that are very Googleable, but you don't have to give them Googleable answers. You can invent an answer, or you can pick something that is ridiculous. Like the first pet you ever had, unicorn, right? As an example. And finally, if you are trying to understand how you could possibly have at least 10 accounts with 10 passwords that are each 16 characters long that are all completely different from each other and not lose your marbles, when in fact you probably have many more than 10 accounts, get a password manager. A password manager, Harlo, can you explain what a password manager is? And more importantly, can you explain what security measures a good password manager has to make it safer than a bad password manager?
Sure. So password managers are software programs that you run on all of your devices where you need passwords that help store, automatically fill in, help you generate, and a variety of other features, all of the passwords. And so this is great because it keeps everything unique with minimal effort. It keeps everything complex with minimal effort. And can help you encourage you to have like the best email hygiene, or sorry, password hygiene as you possibly can, by making sure that it's available across all of your devices seamlessly. Can give you advice about whether or not you're part of a password breach that you need to mitigate that danger and rectify it. Helps you even if you have to share a password, you can do it even more safely. And in certain cases, if you want to, helps you manage your password alongside the two-factor authentication, which you also should have on and required. So there's a number of great password managers out there. And if you have any questions about how I should trust one or the other, we'd be more than happy to talk you through it. But these are the ones that we do recommend. And also there's a couple of other ones that are coming out that are worth looking at. So if you do have any questions about specific ones, happy to answer that as well.
I want to just flag, Harlo, the question people have been asking in the chat. What happens if your password manager gets hacked? Do they ever get hacked? Should I not use one? And it's possible that they might get hacked.
Yeah. Okay. So
totally
actually,
valid question.
This is an amazing question. A lot of people are like, yeah, okay. So now another company has every single one of my password, and what happens if they lose control of it? So the good news about all of these password managers is that your password vault is encrypted, right, to a one password that it is on you to memorize, however it is that you do that, right? So that means that, and this has happened, actually, the password manager LastPass, about 2 years ago, I think, had all of their vaults for all of their users stolen from them by hackers. But the takeaway is that these hackers are now holding on to encrypted blobs of passwords that it would take, if you remember that password checker example, it would take 2 centuries for those passwords to be entirely cracked and brute force into for the attackers to use them. And hopefully 2 centuries is either enough time for you to have changed every single affected password or to have just died and left the planet. And so who cares? Who cares?
Harlo's very dark, but thank you for that contribution. Basically, really good password managers, they scramble your passwords. That's what Harlo means by encryption.
They have to.
They scramble it.
If they're
and
not
only
doing
you.
that, then it's not a password manager. If it's not actually encrypting your password vault to that one password that you definitely correct horse battery staple or whatever it is, in order to open it up, it is not a password manager. And this is why we recommend the ones that we do and not some other ones that you might have heard.
Exactly. And so 1Password, which is a favorite of mine, and several people in the chat have been talking about how much they love it, has free accounts for journalists. Normally 1Password costs money, but for journalists, they offer free accounts. So I strongly suggest going that route if you are a reporter and are comfortable letting 1Password know that you're a reporter. If not, then you can pay for it. Okay, we're going to go a little bit faster just because I want to make sure we get to the social media platforms. So we talked about the top 3 things, right? Password hygiene, invent your security question answers or pick things that no one could Google, get a password manager. Here are 3 recommendations. There are other good ones too, just do your research. Turn on 2-factor authentication on as many accounts as possible. Quick note, the way that you can think about 2-factor authentication is like a second lock on your door. Your password is your first lock. 2-factor authentication is your second lock. The way it works is that there are different ways you can do 2-factor authentication. The way that many people used to do it is by putting their cell phone number in and getting a code sent to their cell phone and then putting the code in to get access to their account. That's not the very best way to do it, and I'll explain why in a minute. The second way to do it is to get an authenticator app like Google Authenticator or Authy, and there are others. There's Duo, there are others. The app basically generates codes all day, every day for your various accounts that you've hooked it up to. And so every time you need to enter a code to get into your account, you just pop open the app, get the code, put it in. It takes 2 seconds. It's no big deal. The third option is the most sophisticated option, which is a physical key. YubiKeys are one brand of key. There are others. We had some folks in the chat talking about how they use YubiKeys, which is excellent. You literally physically have to enter it, like put it in your USB drive, and then it will let you in to whatever account you're trying to get into. If you are a reporter who is doing particularly risky kinds of research, you definitely want to have a physical key. Harlo's got some. She's waving them at you right now. And in fact, Harlo's kind of like the YubiKey fairy. So if you ask nicely, she might give you a YubiKey. You can drop something in the chat and we can discuss. I may have just made Harlo hate me forever because she's going to be mailing YubiKeys for the rest of her life, but we can talk. What I will say is the reason that your cell phone number is not the best bet when it comes to 2-factor authentication is that there is something called SIM jacking, which basically involves people hijacking your phone number, which is comically easy to do. All that someone has to do is call your cell phone company, pretend that they're you. Probably they have to answer a security question or 2, like your date of birth, which they can probably find in 5 seconds. And then they say, hey, I have a new SIM card. Can you route all my traffic somewhere else? And then lo and behold, all of your security codes and everything else is going to somebody else's phone. You can protect yourself from SIM jacking. What you have to do, at least if you are in the United States, you have to call your cell phone company or go on their website and put a PIN on your account so that nobody can make any changes to your account without entering the PIN first or without verbally giving the PIN. If you live in the States and you haven't done this yet, please, please, please leave today's session and do it at some point in the next week. It will protect you from SIM jacking. It is incredibly annoying when it happens, and it's also much more common than you think it is. And back to the 2-factor authentication. It is better to have two-factor authentication than not. So if the only way you can do it is through your cell phone, do it. But it would be safer and better if you could do it through an authenticator app like Google Authenticator or Authy, or through a key. I'm going to keep going in the interest of time. Earlier, we were talking about what do you do if you Googled yourself, you stalked yourself on the internet, maybe you looked on Brave and other platforms. What do you do? For Google, if you find yourself on a website that is trying to do you harm, you may be able to delist that site from searches of your name, right? It's not like the site's not going to disappear. Google is just an aggregator. They can't kill off a website. We probably don't want them to have that kind of power, but they can make it hard to find. And so Google's not going to do that for any piece of content that you might not like, but there are certain pieces of content or sort of abusive tactics that are against their policy. So for example, if someone has non-consensual intimate imagery of you, your home address, things like that, you can fill out this form. You can go to, you can Google, remove your personal information from Google, fill out a form and request that Google delist a website so that when people search your name, they are much less likely to pull it up because it's going to get buried in Google search results. And again, Google's not going to do that for every piece of content, but they are going to do it for pieces of content or abusive tactics that violate their policies. So that is a very useful thing to do and know about. And finally, Harlo, I'm doxing you now. We'll just blur it later. I gave both my email address and Harlo's at this point, but whatever, it's fine. You can find my email address on
My
online
publicly
anyway.
listed email address. You don't have to blur it. People can use it to contact.
Yeah, if you need help, contact either Harlo or me. But basically, you can set up a Google alert for mentions of your own name, which can be really helpful. It's obviously good to know like where you're being mentioned, but also if suddenly you are part of a coordinated harassment campaign, you want to know about it. And so Google Alerts can help inform you if there's something funny going on that you didn't know about. And they're very easy to set up. And you can set them up not just for your name, but for other handy things that help you with your work. All right. Can we have a quick check-in? I know you all can't see each other's responses, but for folks who are in the chat, can you just let us know how you're doing? We're about to delve headfirst into social media accounts. We're going to start with Twitter because Twitter/X is now a dumpster fire, and we need to try to protect ourselves as much as possible on that platform because journalists are still using it extensively. Are folks okay? I'm going to take a quick pause. Colleagues, did I miss any important questions that we need to flag? I think that my colleague Gigi is very effectively answering people's questions as they go. Harlo, I think you are going to talk us through Twitter. Well, this is actually just quickly, I'm just going to mention this one thing, separating the personal and the professional online. This is a very good graphic. Take a quick look at it if you are multitasking just for a minute. Social media platforms and the tech industry in general is very good at making us fuse our personal and professional, our private and our public. It is in their interest to do so. It is up to us when we want to take back power and control to pull apart the public facing, the professional, and the private and the personal. And what that means is that you have different accounts for different purposes, and you set your settings up differently depending on what the purpose of the account is. You don't have to have two of every kind of account necessarily, but you do have to be mindful about what that account's settings are and what you're posting on it. So for example, I have 3 email addresses, bare minimum. One is my private email address only for friends and family. One is my work-facing public email address that I'm happy to share in presentations like this. And the third one is my spammy email where I sign up for stuff. That is really important to do. You may want to have 2 phone numbers, which I'll mention in a minute. You may have an Instagram account that is full of photos of your baby and your puppy and your cute apartment and possibly with the location visible of your apartment, right? You want to make sure that that Instagram account is private and only for the people that you want to see that level of detail about your life. Whereas if you are a photojournalist and you have an Instagram account that you use professionally, you can have that account set to public, but then it's the kind of place where it's better not to post photos of your baby, right? Or of other parts of your private life. And if you folks are in the United States, one way that you can get a public-facing phone number that is different from your SIM card-based phone number is to get Google Voice. I use Google Voice. That is the number I use publicly for everything. Another option is to call your cell phone provider and get a second phone number. Many cell phone providers now allow you to have a second phone number for very cheap. It's essentially a virtual phone number. It's not like literally another phone. And alternatively, you can get a second SIM card. And some phones now support multiple SIM cards, or an eSIM and a physical SIM, or get a second phone. I can't emphasize enough how useful it is to have a public-facing phone number that is distinct from your private SIM card-based number that you use to contact your friends and family. Okay, and now to our favorite platform. Harlo, talk us through Twitter. So if you folks have your phones and you have Twitter or /X on your phone, take out your phone, open the app. If you don't have Twitter on your phone, good for you. I'm very actually thrilled for you. Excellent boundaries, and you can just open the Twitter app online.
Yeah, so a lot of these settings are going to be going through the paths that you would notice on desktop as per mobile, but like, yeah, this is where like the more concise settings are. So let's just talk about the information that you're showing people. For instance, your birthday, right? Which Twitter does ask you for. That and all sorts of information, you should want to make sure that all of that is as private as possible. So make sure that only you can see this information, or even leave it blank if you want to, and that's available to you. If ever you decide that you no longer want to be on X, or it's, you know, like in the event that it doesn't exist the next day and you want to keep an activity record, go ahead and download your information. You can get that for through your settings and privacy subsection in your account. Download an archive of all your Twitter data.
And I strongly suggest not having your birthday on Twitter. I can't emphasize enough, it is not a good idea to have your birthday on Twitter. If you do, delete it.
Yeah. This right here, two things about it. One, we absolutely want you to do this later with your own devices with undivided attention. Don't try to do this as we're speaking and accidentally get yourself locked out, because two-factor authentication is one of the most powerful tools we have to protect an account. And in certain cases, if you lose that second factor, you can lose that account entirely. So we want you to do this with your undivided attention. But when you do this, do the following, and not only for X/Twitter, but do it for absolutely everything that we're going to talk about. Go to enable two-factor authentication. And when you have the method that you get to choose, we recommend, and actually with Twitter, it's now default, the authentication app. So if you recall when Victoria was talking about Google Authenticator or Authy or Microsoft Authenticator, whichever it is that you are using, use that as your second factor. And also do know that all of these accounts we're talking about also accept YubiKeys. So if you do have a physical token, you can enable that as well. Now, this is the important step, not only with Twitter, but also with everything. Take the opportunity. It takes an extra 20 seconds to save your backup code. That means that if you lose your phone, if you lose your YubiKey or whatever, you don't have that second factor, nothing else will work except that backup code. So take the time to print it out, screenshot it, and save it someplace safe, not on your desktop. Do whatever it is that you need to do in order to make sure that in
if you have a password manager, put it in there.
That's an example of another place where you can put it. It's all up to you, and it depends on what you're comfortable with. But as long as it's kept safe and under your control, always do that. Okay. Now let's talk about something that crops up on a variety of platforms, and this is where we find it in X and other places where we've had these accounts forever. You might have gotten into the habit of doing the following, adding extra services to your account that you totally forgot what they are and why you did it. So if you enabled like a Twitter bot from a bajillion years ago to post on your behalf, You don't know what it does. You don't know who developed it, but it's connected to your account. This is the perfect time to take stock of all of these things and revoke any application that are linked to your account that you do not recognize or remember what they do. There's one exception and one exception only, which is the iOS integration for some of you that is attached to your account. In prior versions of Twitter, that was pretty much required in order for you to use Twitter on an iPhone. And until that changes entirely across the entire ecosystem, that's probably going to be useful for you. So you don't have to remove that, but everything else, please do. Another thing that people might have done is logged into a number of different devices and totally don't have access to those devices anymore, but you're still logged in. So it might be an old computer that you have, or you got a new iPad, but your old iPad, you gave it to, your little brother or something like that. That time that you were home for the holidays and you logged in on the family computer. All of these are old sessions that correspond to devices you do not have access to and do not control. So take the time to log out everywhere. And both of these techniques are great because it helps you set a baseline, right? Now you know that you were only logged in ever on your phone and on your computer. Anything else that pops up, that's a cause for alarm. But as long as nothing else pops up, you know what it's supposed to look like, and there's nothing that you have to worry about. Okay, now let's talk about connected accounts, right? So connected accounts are, perhaps you have a burner, right? X account where you like the things that you don't want people to see that you like, although they got rid of that. Aha. So these are examples of connected accounts that depending on how you use Twitter, you might not want, available on your particular, Twitter device of choice. And then there's also, now not everyone has this function, but if you do have it, it's the delegation function. And this is a new privacy feature that allows you to kind of step away from Twitter and give someone else that you trust the ability to use your Twitter account on your behalf. And this is great because it doesn't mean, or it no longer means that you have to share your password and two-factor authentication with someone, right? You can actually just delegate their account, their own account, without sharing these things. This is a great thing to take the advantage of if you ever feel unsafe and just do not want to use Twitter. But just be aware that you have to kind of revoke anyone who no longer makes sense to have that capability. So test it out. Okay, let's talk about who can see your stuff. Okay, now, if you want to, all of these things are toggleable. If you want to protect your posts, what that means is when you enable it, no one who you do not follow can see your posts or even interact with your comments on other posts. And so when you're feeling unsafe on Twitter and you just need to limit the reach of your content, this is the perfect way to tame that down. Once again, it's toggleable, which is great. And also think about things like who can tag you. You also have to think about how we culturally use these platforms. So on Twitter, who do you want tagging you in photos? If you want to be notified or brought into a conversation, you want to be added, right? You want someone to use your handle. You don't want someone to tag you in a photo because culturally that's rife for abuse and it's not how people normally use it. So unless you find that incredibly useful, you have the choice of making sure that at least only people you follow, or at best, turn it entirely off. There is also a new feature called safety mode, and as it rolls out, if you want to experiment with it, by all means, please do. This allows you to let Twitter's automated, algorithm block accounts that might be abusive or spammy to you. And you can also configure it so it activates on a timer and goes away or whatever. So if you'd like to experiment with that, that's a great middle ground to strike if you don't want to protect your posts entirely. Okay, you have a number of options as far as DMs and replies are concerned. First and foremost, in your replies to threads on the public feed, you can even filter potentially unwelcome replies. This is letting the algorithm take control, but it might be interesting to experiment with. And also, if you want something stronger, you always have the option to mute people and to block people. Muting is a little bit less strong than blocking. But have a look at, like all of the accounts that you've blocked and muted and manage that on a, on a periodic basis. And also understand that you can do things like mute words and mute notifications from people who are demanding too much of your headspace as you use the platform. Blocking, on the other hand, is a little bit more severe and potentially final, because unlike muting, the person who is blocked knows that this has happened to them. And so if for some reason you fear, being abused even more by someone by the act of blocking them, you might want to mute. But there are plenty of you who are just like, I want someone to know that they are not welcome in my space. And in which case you can make the decision to go ahead and block them entirely. It's up to you, but just understand the significance of both of those choices. Okay. All right, DMs. Controversial, because some people have to have their DMs open or really enjoy the opportunity to keep their DMs open. Some people definitely don't want that, and it's entirely up to you. But whatever it is that you decide, you know that you have the ability to toggle whether or not you allow messages from anyone. And if ever you're feeling unsafe on that platform, that's a great time to allow message requests from everyone. But if you do want to keep them enabled, you have a middle ground, such as filtering low quality messages. So that might let the algorithm weed out any of potential interactions that's going to be undesirable and potentially abusive. One thing that I love doing is turning off read receipts. And so if you turn off the option called show read receipts, it does not give anyone any notification that you've interacted with their messages. I do this not for my protection. I do this just across the board because it's none of anyone's business when I am interacting with them or when I'm interacting with the app in general. So do that for your own peace of mind. And also, this is really important. Twitter recently rolled out a new feature for video and audio calling in-app, and unfortunately, it was enabled automatically. So if you do not want to use this feature, or you want to have more control over when people can just ping you on your phone via Twitter, go ahead and disable that within your direct messages settings. Okay, now let's talk about discoverability and the contacts that you expose. I highly recommend disabling letting people find you by email and find you by phone number. One, that means that they're plugging in your private information into Twitter and thus giving them that information. And also know that it's entirely unnecessary. Twitter is the public sphere, so to speak. So you're probably broadcasting your Twitter handle for people to follow you everywhere you possibly can, right? So this is actually redundant. And conversely, disable syncing your address book contacts, because what you are ultimately doing is giving Elon Musk your address book. Please not only reserve that privacy for yourself, but also extend that privacy to other people in your contacts list. These are two separate apps. Don't share them. And if you have done that in the past, consider enabling remove all contacts to ostensibly remove that information from Twitter's database, as it already is. All right, what's next? Okay, here's some more about privacy. Let's talk about your location information. So if you go through this particular path, you can find out where you have the ability to disable sharing your precise location with Twitter, and also having ads personalized to you based off of where you are and the location that you share. Not only is this great for your privacy, and also telling a platform that you are not going to offer up this information for no reason. But it also can protect you in the event that any of your location metadata is appended to your interactions on Twitter in ways that are not readily like clear to you. So you want to protect this information. If you want people to know where you are, you tell them. You make the decision to tell them. Don't let an app decide for you that it's going to use that information when it wants to, okay? And also when we're thinking about, you know, this hellscape of surveillance culture where we live, have a look at your ads preferences and disable things like personalized ads based off of your inferred identity, and also like sharing information with your with Twitter's business partners. Now, this does not fix surveillance capitalism. It does not fix the ad industry, but it's just one way that you can wrestle control back. There are a number of ways across a variety of platforms, on your phones, on your desktops, etc. But this is just a perfect way to start if you're going through X. Victoria, let's talk Facebook.
Thank you. So I think we don't have enough time. Well, we can run over, but in terms of fitting within our hour and a half, we're not going to be able to cover all the platforms that are left. So we've got Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn, and Venmo. I'm going to skip Facebook for now because it has a gajillion settings that are quite time consuming and complicated to adjust. And at least in the States, I know a lot of people are moving away from Facebook. If you don't use Facebook for work, you can make your Facebook as private as humanly possible. That's what I would do. I'm happy to come back at the end and run people through Facebook, but we're going to skip Facebook for now because I think in the States anyway, a lot more folks are using Instagram nowadays and LinkedIn and Venmo, but not for work, but it's actually really important. So I'm going to quickly roll through these slides. Very fast, just ignore them. Here we go. Harlo, I know you just did Twitter, but could you somewhat more quickly, because it's also shorter, do Instagram, and then I'll talk through LinkedIn and Venmo.
Okay, sounds great. All right, let's talk really quickly Instagram. Here's the key points. We already talked about it. Two-factor authentication, save those backup codes. You have the ability to use the Authenticator app and or your YubiKey or whatever it is. All right, do that on your own. Next, similarly, have a look at the information that you're leaving in your bio, in your profile, etc. You know, like people tend to change that up and point to like links online and stuff like that. Just make sure that you have all that information reined in. And similarly to Twitter, think about where you have logged in before. Think about if you have had integrations into your Instagram account that you don't know what they are and unfamiliar. Take that time to establish a baseline and prune it so you're always in control and you know if something weird happens. Okay, what next?
So we talked about checking what apps and websites you've connected to your Insta, and we talked about making sure that you're not logged in some random place that you have never physically been or that you haven't been in like 3 years, right? So I'm just stalling a little so people have a minute to find these on their phones because I know it's hard to do this in real time. Hopefully you have found it. We're going to keep moving, but we will share this recording so you can go back and do it more slowly if you need to.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about the privacy implications and the cultural expectations of tagging and stuff. And I think that this is where Instagram and Twitter kind of differ. You can always set your account to private, and that's especially nice if you're not using Instagram, you know, from a professional setting. Once again, it is toggleable. Unlike Twitter, this is a place where you do expect people to tag you in photos, right? Because this is a photographic medium. But you should always decide who it is who can tag you, and it should be people that you follow. Not necessarily anyone, right? And if someone, like if you go to an event and someone is like, oh, can I tag you? Then you can say, I give you permission to tag me here, like I'll follow you, you can follow me or whatever, in order to like set that up, right? But whatever it is that you decide, make sure that you absolutely manually approve tags, not only for your own safety and for your own privacy, right? Because you don't want someone abusing it. You don't want someone revealing your location when you didn't expect that it would be revealed. But also just think, like, if you look horrible in that photo, you want to be tagged in it, right? So always manually
So
improve.
for vanity purposes, at the very least, you want to turn on manually approved tags.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And also think about limiting your interaction. So if you go to settings and privacy and scroll through to limited interactions, if you enable these limits, then you let the algorithm decide in its own special way that we don't necessarily know how, that the amount of reach that could contribute to coordinated harassment is scaled down a little bit. And if you ever find yourself in a place where that feels unsafe as a medium, or if you just find yourself going viral for some reason, that might be a great way to protect.
And you can toggle it on and off, right? Like
Yeah,
you can toggle
exactly.
it on and off in 5 seconds. So you might decide to turn it on for 3 days. Things have blown over, then you can turn it right off again. It's a really useful tool.
Yep. Okay. All right. So messages and story replies. Once again, these are all decisions you should make. Decide who you want to receive DMs requests from. If you are less permissive, then your requests get separated into another panel, and that's actually kind of useful. You can also just decide that only people that I follow, my mutuals, can actually DM me. Similarly, who can add you to groups, who can reply to your stories, right, which is separate than what you post on your timeline, and also who can see if you're online. Now, similarly to the read receipts, anything that has to do with when I am on an app, I do not want people to know, but it's up to you to decide. But I think that there's a lot of power and agency in that. Okay. Let's talk about hidden words. Similarly to what you see on Twitter, you can mute, any kind of particular words, and this actually does also include emojis, right? That will make the comments section a lot more safe for you if you find that a post tends to get a lot of action and helps you weed out, stuff that's just repetitive or not helpful.
Thank you, Harlo, for whirlwind talking us through Twitter and Insta at once. I have a favor to ask you while I talk people through LinkedIn. There's a question that's been sitting in the Q&A for a little while. I won't say the person's name, just out of respect, but I think you'll find it. I don't actually know the answer to that question, but I think if anyone would, it would be you. So if you could take a look at it and possibly answer directly in the Q&A rather than verbally while I walk people through LinkedIn, I'd so appreciate that. And if you don't know, just let the person know that we don't know the answer. Okay, LinkedIn. I am begging you all, if you have LinkedIn, take a few minutes with me right now to tidy up your LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is one of the places where people are bleeding the most information and have absolutely no idea. So open your LinkedIn. If you've got it on your phone, it's going to be a lot easier. But if you don't worry. I actually think it's really great when people don't have apps on their phone. Just go to the web version of LinkedIn. I'm not going to go through this again, but remember, turn on two-step verification, save your backup codes. I think they're called recovery codes on LinkedIn. Do this in the future with your undivided attention. Let's get to the nitty-gritty of it. Okay, same as the other apps. See where you are signed in on LinkedIn. You go to settings, you go to sign in and security, where you're signed in. If you don't recognize the places you're signed in, that's not good. You want to go ahead and boot yourself from whatever random places you're signed in that you don't recognize. Take a look at devices that remember your password and make sure that you don't have old or unfamiliar devices where you logged in once at someone's house on LinkedIn and then forgot, right? And then app lock. This is useful if you are someone who is concerned about a seizure or an access of your phone. So let's say you're covering a protest, you get arrested or you get some kind of altercation with state forces, right? Law enforcement or other state forces, and you're worried they might grab your phone. You may want to, in that case, be someone who has app lock on. If that's not your reality, then you probably don't need to have app lock on. That's up to you, but I'm just flagging that it is a useful tool to know about for LinkedIn, because LinkedIn also shows you everyone, all your contacts. Take a little bit of time to look at your profile information. So you go to settings, you go to something called account preferences, profile information. Look at your name, location, and industry. I would strongly suggest not adding your exact location or a zip code. You can just do if you're in a big city, you can just put the big city. If whatever that big city is. If you're in a very small place, you might want to pick a region instead of the city itself. or go broader than that. And make sure that you've looked at the contact info that you have. And I would reduce that info as much as possible to maybe just a public facing email address that you don't mind random people who don't know you yet emailing you on, if you're going to include that at all. It's also a really good idea to turn off syncing contacts, because what that means is that LinkedIn is going to look at who is actually on your actual phone and then try to make inferences and connect you to those people. I personally do not want LinkedIn looking at the whole list of people that are on my phone. Some people have sources on their phone. So you want to turn that off. And take a look at the partners and services that you have connected to your LinkedIn. And I would recommend removing as many random third-party apps that are connected to your LinkedIn as possible, including Twitter, because unfortunately, in the chaos that has become Twitter/X, their safety and security practices I no longer trust. I don't know that I ever trusted them, but I'm not sure that the company is being run well enough at this point to have solid safety and security. And so I would not connect your Twitter account in the backends of your other apps if it's me. All right, I'm going to go a little bit fast, but remember, you can watch this video again and pause if you need to, if you need a little bit of time to do some of these things. I know it's hard to do them very quickly in real time. Okay. There's a section under settings called visibility, right? We were in a different part of the settings before. Now we go to the section called visibility, and there's a whole bunch of different things in there that you want to look at, right? The visibility of your profile network, you're going to be in that little section. Profile viewing options. Pick the one that works best for you. I'm not going to recommend one. It's going to work differently for different people. Take a look. Edit your public profile. Later on, when you have time, just sit down and see what exactly have I made public on my LinkedIn, and do I want all of those things to be public? And if you do, great. But just make sure you've made a conscious decision about it and it's not some old thing that you forgot about. And then finally, who can see or download your email address? I would recommend it be either only me or first degree connections. Obviously, if you feel differently, you do whatever's comfortable for you. People can always DM you on LinkedIn. They don't necessarily need your email. And then if you're talking to them over DM and you're comfortable giving them your email, you can. And potentially toggle off allow connection to export emails. Because again, like all these kind of back channel connections to the back ends of your accounts make you less secure. And pausing for a minute while people are doing this. Hopefully that's giving them a little bit of time. Okay. You're still in the section called visibility of your profile and network. Take a look at who can see your last name. I have mine turned off. That's my preference. You can leave it on if that's important to you. Take a look at profile discovery and visibility off LinkedIn. I'm okay with my LinkedIn being discoverable when people Google me, but not everybody is, and that's fine. Look at profile discovery using email address and profile discovery using phone number. I strongly suggest turning those off. I don't see why someone should try to find you through your phone number or your email address. They probably have your name and that should be adequate. I would turn that off and take a look at blocking. If you blocked people, if you want to block people, that's a useful tool. It's obviously something I think people use less on LinkedIn than they do on Twitter and Facebook, but it's good to know it's available to you on LinkedIn because we have worked with reporters who are also getting intensely harassed on LinkedIn, and blocking can be quite helpful. And finally, look at the visibility of your connections and decide how many layers of people do you want to be able to see who you're connected to. If you want everyone on the internet to see who you're connected to, that's totally okay, as long as that's a conscious decision you've made, as opposed to the platform defaulting you into that. Otherwise, consider limiting it, right? And certainly, I mean, I wouldn't really connect with sensitive sources on LinkedIn at all, because I don't trust platforms even when you limit the connections visibility. But especially if you're someone who knows that you have made connections on LinkedIn with folks who might be sensitive, or the relationship between you might be sensitive, you want to limit the visibility of your connections as much as you can. All right. Now we're in a section called data privacy. We're no longer in the visibility section. We're now in the section called data privacy. I would turn off as much of this as you can, right? How LinkedIn uses your data. Turn off social, economic, and workplace research. This isn't necessarily going to make you more secure, and it's, as Harlo said, not going to solve surveillance capitalism, but it will reduce the volume of data that LinkedIn is entitled to use about you and your habits on its platform. In terms of who can reach you, that's really just something for you to make a decision about yourself, right? Decide invitations to connect. Is it available to everyone? Invitations from your network, messages, research invites, etc. For most people, they're using LinkedIn to connect as broadly as possible. So it's very important for them to be able to be reachable as broadly as possible. But you may want to make adjustments depending on your own reality. And then in terms of messaging experience, you may want to turn on automated detection of harmful content. I think that's a relatively new feature, if I'm not mistaken. But it can be handy. It can the LinkedIn will proactively try to detect harmful content and set it aside so that you are not being bombarded with it. And if you don't like how it's working, you can always turn it off, but I think it's probably worth having on, especially if you're someone who experiences harassment across multiple platforms, including on LinkedIn. All right. Okay. Finally, in data privacy, take a look at permitted services. Again, it comes back to this question of how many apps are you linking to your account? You'll notice that there are several settings that do somewhat similar things, right? So you want to make sure that everywhere where you're connecting third-party apps to your account, you remove those connections unless you explicitly want them. And finally, again, this is a personal preference thing for advertising data. I would recommend turning off as much of that as possible. It will mean that you get less personalized ads on LinkedIn, but it will also mean slightly less tracking and surveillance, at least marginally so. I feel that it is worth it to have less personalized ads in order to have less of my behavior and patterns on LinkedIn being used by LinkedIn for everything they want to do. That is my personal preference. You obviously can make a decision about what works for you. I'm going to very quickly run us through, I think this might be, I'm going to very quickly run us through Venmo, and I'm going to tell you why. More and more reporters have been coming to us with issues with Venmo. Venmo is not intuitive, like obviously journalists use LinkedIn, Instagram, in some cases, Twitter, sometimes even Facebook for their professional, getting the word out about their work, connecting with sources and all that stuff. It is intuitive that reporters are using those sorts of platforms in that way. I wouldn't say that reporters are extensively using Venmo, right, to do their jobs. Maybe, but probably not. The issue is that Venmo, as it currently stands, does not have the world's greatest privacy and security practices. It defaults you to be as publicly visible and your private transactions to be as publicly visible as possible, which many people don't realize. And so it's actually something that puts reporters at risk. And so and actually puts anyone at risk. So I want you to take a moment. If you are someone who is in the States and you use Venmo, if you're not in the States, this probably won't be relevant to you. But if you use Venmo, take a minute right now with me. It will take 3 minutes, it's very short, to tighten your Venmo settings. So take a minute to open Venmo. Harlo, did you say you wanted to talk people through Venmo? You can talk people through Venmo if you want. We can tag team it. I don't mind. I feel like you said you were going to talk people through Venmo because you use it. Why don't you do the slide and then I'll do the next one.
Okay, sure. It's really, really simple. Set everything to private, including your account, right? So settings. And actually, I'm going to
do it in real time. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have done that since the.
Yeah, I know you have, but.
But you tap on your profile, little gear to settings, and go to privacy, default privacy settings. Make your settings private, right? So visible to sender and recipient only. Also, past transactions. Go ahead and change all to private, right? Don't even change to friends. This isn't social media, you know. For your friends list, private, only visible to you. I don't know why you have friends on Venmo.
And I also don't know why anyone has to have friends on Venmo. That's weird.
Set your location to private. So there's a couple. It depends on the if you're using app on Android or if you're using it on iOS. In iOS on an iPhone, you tap to go to app permissions, location, never. And actually, I think it is the same, but the the application settings are going to look different depending on whether you're on Android or on iPhone, but just deny every time or location never depending on your operating system.
So I think Harlo went a little bit off slide, but you get the
Oh,
gist, right?
sorry.
Take a look at toggling to private for your privacy. Turn off your location tracking on Venmo. Turn off all past transactions on Venmo. Turn off visibility of your friends on Venmo. Also, maybe don't have friends on Venmo, but that's a separate question. And then finally, you can also enable a PIN if that's something that you want to do, which will make you marginally a little bit more secure, is enabling the PIN. That's up to you. So I'm pretty sure that's all of our Venmo slides. But take some time on Venmo. Now, I have a question. We are now over time, but we still have a lot of people who have sat through the entire hour and a half. God bless you. My question for you is this: would you like me to run over and quickly show you Facebook? I mean, it wasn't going to be super quick. It's going to be about 10 minutes because Facebook has about 5 gajillion settings. I know some people still extensively use Facebook. Other people do not. The issue is that a lot of people don't use Facebook anymore, but still have an account. And they filled that account out when they were perhaps very young, and they put a lot of private information and then they forgot. So their Facebook can be an enormously risky place for their private data. I am getting a lot of yeses about running over and going through Facebook. If you have to go, it's totally fine, go. But this way, at least we'll record it and you can come back and watch Facebook at the end. Forgive me, I'm going to have to do a quick whirlwind backwards through my slides so I can get to Facebook. And Harlo, if you need to go, this is a little bit past when we were meant to keep you. So if you need to go, please don't worry. Totally understandable. If you want to stay and tag team things with me, you are more than welcome, but I can do this if you've got to run. Okay, Facebook. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, so many of us have had Facebook since we were really young, or even not that young. And we were like, I want to tell, do you guys remember, those of you who Facebook arrived right when I was like kind of, I think, late teens. Anyway, it was when I was not very wise about privacy and security. And it was also when none of us were that wise about privacy and security because we thought that social media was this cool thing that connects us all. And we didn't realize they were making money off of our eyeballs and private data. And so I filled out everything you could possibly fill out on Facebook and then forgot about it for many, many years until I started doing this job and realized, oh my God, I have a lot of private data available on Facebook that nobody should have access to and needs to know. So obviously, as we've been saying, please turn on two-factor authentication on Facebook and make a long, complex password for Facebook. So many people that I know have been hacked on Facebook. It is really annoying. It is hard to get your account back. People can see all kinds of things you don't want them to see. So make a strong password on Facebook, turn on two-factor authentication, and save your backup code so you don't get locked out. Okay. All right, and now I'm going to try to go a little slow because it's very hard on Facebook to find these things. They are buried in layers and layers and layers of settings, and they vary depending on the kind of phone you have. And sometimes even if you have 2 iPhones, they'll have different settings, which we've discovered testing out these slides. So you go to settings and privacy, you go to settings, and then now Facebook has this new thing called Account Center. This is quite new. You go to the section called Password and Security. And like we did with all the other apps, you see where you're logged on. And if you are logged on somewhere you do not recognize, boot that, right? I found a very old phone logged in recently. And I've done this before, and somehow a very old phone was logged in. And I was like, I don't even know this phone. I don't even remember I had this phone. So it's still useful to do. And then you're still in Account Center, you're still in Password and Security. Consider turning on, I would recommend turning on login alerts, which basically means that Facebook will tell you if somebody who's not you is trying to log into your account. If you have a long password and you have two-factor authentication, you'll be just fine. But if you don't, that'll be a good wake-up call to do it. And even then, it will just be useful to know that somebody is trying to hack into your account. Because you might want to then think about what your other accounts look like and making sure those are protected too. It's kind of a red flag, right? Okay. Next, tagging on Facebook. So you're now in a different part of the app's settings. You're in settings and privacy, you're in settings, you're not in Account Center anymore. And you're scrolling down to a section called Audience and Visibility. And then under that, there's something called Profile and Tagging, right? This you're going to probably have to spend a little bit of time with, but you may want to enable limit who can see past posts. Because if you've been posting things on Facebook since you were 14 or whatever age you were, you may not want people to be able to find those posts. And so I would suggest turning on limit who can see past posts, but it's also worth really poking around and thinking about who can see your future posts, and maybe limiting them just to friends, not to the public by default. On every individual post in Facebook, you can make a different choice. But blanket as a default, you may not want everything to be public all the time. In that same section, profile and tagging, take a look at reviewing. And I strongly suggest turning on all sort of manual tag review settings for the same reasons Harlo was explaining, doing that on Insta. You don't want people to tag you without your knowledge. And if they tag you abusively and you've turned on manual review, you can just say no. And I would actually even suggest limiting tagging as much as you can, unless you have very good reasons not to, right? If you really want to be easily taggable on Facebook, that's totally fine. I respect that, but then turn on the manual review. All right, taking a moment. Harlo, there's one more question in the Q&A, which if you're able to answer, I would be grateful. And if not, no worries. But I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay, you're now in a section called Audience and Visibility, Followers and Public Content. Again, you just have to make some decisions. Who can follow you? I recommend limiting it to friends. Public post comments, who can comment on stuff you're doing? I would recommend narrowing it down. You don't have to if you don't want to, depending on how you use Facebook. Public profile info. I would recommend that most of your profile on Facebook is not public and that only your friends can see it, or maybe very few people can see it. And then I would also suggest turning on hide your friend requests and friends lists from public view. I'll tell you why. I have seen many, many instances of journalists who did a really good job locking down their privacy, and then the abusive trolls who were going after them got frustrated because they couldn't find information they wanted about the journalists they were trying to abuse. So then they started looking for who their friends and family are. And they would go to Facebook and try to figure out who are all the people who are your friends, and then go after those people. And so if you're someone who gets a lot of online abuse and you're still using Facebook, you might want to make your friends lists not public. And there is a pathway that you can see here. Hopefully you can find it if you spend a little bit of time on your phone, because it might be in a different place, unfortunately, on your phone than it is on mine. Okay, this one is really important. Please turn off location tracking on Facebook. It's under settings and privacy settings, and device permissions location. Go ahead and turn that off. And then take a look at the apps and websites section. Again, remove anything you don't recognize. And finally, I really recommend turning off Facebook activity. You can view and manage the activity and then try to basically, off Facebook activity means that when you're doing stuff on your phone or on your browser that has nothing to do with Facebook, Facebook is still tracking you. And ideally, you would turn some of that off. So I did a bit of a whirlwind because we're running over time and I don't want this video to be twice the length of what it's supposed to be. But I really appreciate just how many people have stayed on for the entire session, plus an extra 10-15 minutes. The one takeaway you can have from today is that really what I recommend is just sitting down with every app that you have on your phone that's a social media app and just poking around the settings, right? You can decide which settings you need to adjust in which ways. Just don't let the platforms decide these things for you by default. So, and if you're standing in line somewhere bored out of your mind, stuck, it's a great time to poke around the settings of your social media platforms. So that is it from us. Thank you so much for joining. We hopefully did our best to answer all of your questions. Take a look at the field manual for more guidance if you need it. And if you need to reach out to Harlo and I, you can. This is our information. These are our public facing emails. So you can find us there as needed, and take very good care of yourselves and stay safe out there. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.